So Republic Book 9 begins in the middle of a conversation that you don't actually have unless you've read Book 8. And Book 8 was about all these different types of personalities. So if you've got these three parts of the soul with the rational part and the spirited part and the appetitive part. I hate that sound of the chalk. How do these get out of whack with each other? There's different regimes in Plato, in the Republic, and to the regimes correspond different kinds of people. So his best republic is the one where the people who are the guardians, who spend all their time, learning about how things work, and they enjoy learning. They are the ones who run the show, the philosopher kings. And then the auxiliaries are the lesser guardians, the police, the firefighters, all the people who have to have courage are, enforcing the rule of the guardians. And then you got everybody else, this big mass of craftspeople, all the other people doing things ranging from those who farm to those who beautify to those who make music. Pick anything you like. Plato thinks that the rational part should rule over these parts, should tell them what to do, and the spirited part should enforce the rule. So what happens when these things get out of whack? Well, it's sort of like what happens with societies. So this part is really about getting honor. Or we don't use the word honor so much. We talk about respect or pride or being in charge, right? This is the competitive part of this too. Where we're not competing because we just want, the object of the competition. We want the glory that comes with it, right? Now, what happens when this part is in charge and uses the rational part just to get what it wants, and it's still keeping the appetites in check? Then you have what he calls something like an aristocracy, but it's not completely an aristocracy. It's about honor, so he calls it a timocracy. And you can imagine people like this, not just political regimes where, say, the military is in charge, right? But, and the scientists are helping the military. But people are like that. You all know people who are particularly driven. They tend to be fairly honorable, right? They tend not to indulge their appetites too much because they've got big goals. But they may not be thinking through whether those goals really are what they ought to be striving for. So they tend to get themselves into trouble over time. That's a fairly honorable way of living according to Plato, but it's going to lead eventually to lower and lower conditions. And then you're going to have cases where the appetitive part gets really to be in charge. The next kind of regime that he talks about is the oligarchy. And I think you guys have heard that term, right? We say oligarchy, what comes to mind? The term really means rule by the few. How do we use it? Remember the Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street protests against the oligarchs, the 1%. What makes the 1% the 1%? It's not that they are the most honorable people. What makes them the 1%? Yeah.
They have the most money.
Yeah, so money gives them power, gives them influence. They can buy some respect, but the Occupy Wall Street movement, if there was any coherence to it, part of it was a reaction against the 1% running the show. Now, when the rich run the show, it's called an oligarchy. And rich people, when it comes to money and power, what do they tend to want? What is their main goals? There could be a variety, right? Some rich people actually want to make the world a better place, so they start foundations. Like, after Bill Gates made a ton of money, he and his wife established the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they divested themselves of a lot of their wealth. They're still, like astronomically wealthy compared to us, right? But they put a lot of that wealth to good use. all these foundations, the Ford Foundation, Carnegie Foundation, they've done a lot of great things, right? Is that always how the rich use, their wealth, the mechanics of things? What else do they do? Try to get richer, right? And one way to be richer is to screw everyone else, right? Say, forget you, I'm not paying you a lot of money. As a matter of fact, if I can get out of contracts with you, I'm not going to pay you at all. And you don't become rich by living like a rich person. You become rich by holding on as much as you can and trying to get as much as you can. And so the oligarchical person tends to be kind of stingy. They tend, in their soul, they want things, but they're more interested in the acquisition than in the enjoyment, you might say. So they tend to be kind of stern. Now, Plato picks this up at this point in Book 9. He talks about the democratic person. And I'm going to just give you a sort of thumbnail sketch of that. If oligarchy is about riches, democracy is about freedom, about getting to do what you like. One definition of democracy that the ancient Greeks had didn't have anything to do with voting. It had to do with the fact that in a democracy, anybody gets to say and do whatever they want to, so long as they don't kill somebody or burn the Acropolis down, or things like that. Destroy the trireme fleet, disrupt the chorus. There are laws against all sorts of things. But the idea was you had license, you had eleutheria, which meant freedom. You had parrhesia, which means the capacity to say whatever you like. And the democratic person is kind of more laid back than the oligarchical person. They're both motivated ultimately by their appetites. These are two different modes of serving the appetites. So whereas the oligarchical person is trying to hold on to things and get more and more of it, the democratic person is like, hey, there's money's for spending. Let's have a good time. And Plato talks about that person getting drawn into all sorts of activities by companions who are really into indulging themselves. And, so I think about kids going off to college, right? You guys are all juniors. You've seen, you went through freshman year. You've seen other kids go through it. What typically happens when kids leave, particularly when they leave fairly strict households and they go off to college? Yeah.
You go insane.
Yeah. And in what way? I mean, that's sort of a general...
Drinking, partying.
Yeah. And those are the things that Plato's calling the appetites, We like to drink alcohol because it makes us feel good, That's why people take drugs, too, because drugs make people feel good. They're not good for you, but what are you going to say?
No, I was just going to say that they would basically just kind of cut loose.
Yeah.
Do whatever they want.
Sometimes they wind up in trouble with, with grades because of that. Plato didn't know about video games, but if you get really into a video game, that could shoot your whole first semester, right? I've seen that happen to some students. Eating, they talk about the freshman 15. Up in the culinary, it's called the freshman 30. Because, they're eating rich food, right? But you see people go through that. If you don't have restrictions, and you haven't learned how to place restrictions on yourself, and the people around you are saying, hey, let's have a good time, it's easy to get into that sort of stuff. Can have to do with dating, sexual relationships. All those are matters of the appetitive part of the soul. So the democratic person eventually swings back. And I think you guys have seen this sort of stuff, right? How many of you actually, your freshman year, you didn't go completely hog wild, because if you did, you wouldn't be here now, right? But, you indulged yourself quite a bit, and then you kind of swung back, and now you're more on track. Well, only one person? Yeah, okay. This is more realistic. Yeah. And we all, actually, I did that too. And I'd even been in the Army before I went to college, so I should have known better. But it's fairly natural. The democratic person has a strict parent, and they find a happy medium between the strict parent and these other people who are just totally self-indulgent and are probably getting themselves in lots of trouble. The tyrannical person comes about later on. instead of having the strict oligarchical parent who's giving them rules and saying, don't spend your money on that sort of thing, think about your future, they've got this happy-go-lucky democratic parent who's much more lax. And so when they go off on their own and they run into all these companions who are all about totally indulging themselves, there's not as much to swing back to. And so the tyrannical person is also going to be all about this appetitive part of the soul. But what's going to happen, as Plato describes it, is there's something that's sort of like injected into them. There's the metaphor that he uses. He says, imagine the same thing that happened to the son that's already happened to the father. He's drawn into a perfectly lawless life. Now, lawless means without rules, without structure. And you can imagine what that's like. By his seducers, this is termed perfect liberty, perfect freedom, getting to do what you want to do. It's often held up as an ideal for us. His father and friends take part with his moderate desires, so when he wants to go to the movies or hang out and go fishing, his dad's there for that, his mom's there for that. But when it comes to the drinking party that goes on for 2 days, or going off to get drugs, or going off to Vegas and just trying every single thing that you could possibly try, his dad's not going to come along for that ride. It's going to be all these other people. And as that happens, like he says, they contrive to implant him a master passion, a master desire, a master appetite, to be lord over his idle and spendthrift lusts. So what does he really want? To be master, to indulge. And how's this going to work? Well, there's nothing intrinsically terrible about indulging yourself once in a while. As a matter of fact, you probably should, or you're going to go nuts. But if you want to indulge yourself all the time, if your main goal in life is to just indulge every appetite and desire that you have, you're going to start running into problems. And Plato traces out this whole story of sort of, decline and fall of this kind of person. So, I'm going to skip over, whether he's like a drunk or stuff like that. So he says, how does this person live? So there's going to be feasts and carousals and revelings and courtesans. Now that's fancy language for he's going to go out drinking and drink an awful lot. And, in our society, probably try some hard drugs. And there'll be some prostitutes involved. And, let's see, revelings, parties. Imagine Charlie Sheen. He's going to live a Charlie Sheen kind of life. He's been out of the news for a while because he's managed to stay out of trouble. But, that sort of level of self-indulgence. That's what this person is after. And what happens next? Now imagine that you were going to do that. And not just the you that's in college right now, who actually has to, turn in papers and do internships and that sort of business. Imagine it's the you 5 years from now. You are already in your first real job that you had out of college, and you've managed to rise up a couple ranks. What happens if you do that, and not just on vacation? Yeah.
Everything's going to get screwed up.
Yeah, it's going to screw up your relationships most likely, and friends will start saying, what the hell's wrong with you? But what's the real big problem? What are you going to run out of? Money. Yeah, you need money in order to buy all those sorts of fun things. Just think about it. Plato is talking about the appetites. The appetites have to do with eating, drinking, sex, entertainment, rest, those sorts of things. If you want to eat fancy meals, you have to spend a lot of money, don't you? Even if you make them yourself, you got to buy fancy ingredients, and those cost quite a bit. There's this great spoof article out, that just started going around the internet about this woman and her terrible experience at Whole Foods. Have any of you seen this?
Yeah.
Yeah, Google it, and it's really quite funny. She ends up like spending $300 for one shopping trip. Boy, if you're going to do that, you better have a good job. Especially if you want to pair those dishes with fine wines. You can spend a lot of money on wine. You can even spend a lot of money on beer if you like fancy beer, right?
I know we'll find some cheap wine.
Yeah, cheap wine, yeah. But this guy doesn't want cheap wine. He wants the best of it, you know. He wants the top label stuff. Sooner or later, this guy's going to run out of money. Then what's going to happen? Is he going to say, oh man, I really need to cut back? Probably he's going to go into, in our society, deep credit card debt, right? Because credit cards allow us to spend way more than we actually have. Big problem for my generation and for your generation. They love to get students into credit card debt. What happens when you reach the limit? You could just say, that's it. I got to cut back on this sort of stuff. Is this person equipped to do that? Why not? Why couldn't they just, like, through force of will, say, cold turkey? No more. Yeah.
That's their life at this point, so if they can't buy it, they'll probably steal it or find some other way to get it.
Yeah. This part of their soul has become the main thing. Think of it in terms of muscles. Have any of you ever seen these guys who like totally bulk up the top part of their body and they don't work out their lower body? And because their lower body may actually be in fairly good shape, but because the top is so bulked up, they look really weird. They're misformed, really. It's like that. These parts of the soul atrophy. If you don't use your reason, and part of the function of reason is actually to say, hey, this is good for me, this is bad for me, I should think about this, I should, imagine the consequences. If you don't do that sort of thing, is that easy to do once you actually need to do it? No, because you haven't worked out that intellectual muscle. Likewise, the spirited part of the soul. This is really where your force of will lies. The capacity to say no to yourself or to push yourself to do things that are difficult. If you haven't done that, is that easy to do? No. It's easy to go after what you want, though. And then you're right, you probably have to steal it. Or Plato actually goes through a whole list of things. This guy is going to prey on who first? The random passerby? Their family. This is one of the things that actually makes addiction so difficult, is addicts behave like this tyrannical person, and they prey first on those who are close to them, which tends to tick off those people who are close to them and make it very difficult for them to be a support network for them when they want to quit being addicts. But this guy is rapidly alienating everybody. He begins with his family, and first he just cheats them. Imagine somebody like taking money out of their mom's purse or their dad's wallet late at night, and then that's not going to go on that long though. And eventually, they're going to start saying, "Where's the money going? What are you doing with this?" So he will, as he says, tyrannize over them. And tyranny is based on, I'm going to put this word at tyranny. 3 F's. The tyrant keeps control over other people and obtains what they want, ultimately by force, by fraud, or by fear. And that's not going to be a very happy life. The tyrant thinks that they're really having the happiest life because they're getting to indulge themselves. But if you look at it closely, they're not happy at all. So he talks about them taking the property, and then pretty soon mom and dad are out of money. So where are you going to go after that? Other people. So like he says, he breaks into a house or steals the garments of some nightly wayfarer. That sort of theft is not as common these days, except for shoes, I think, or jackets. But it was quite common in Greek time. Next, he proceeds to clear a temple. We don't generally steal from temples. I suppose it does happen that churches and mosques are broken into from time to time. But temples were sort of like the important cultural centers for the Greek time. So imagine if somebody stole all the money out of the Marist accounts. Marist goes broke. That would be the sort of thing that they're talking about. And eventually, he leads to all sorts of things. He talks about some of them becoming, bodyguards or mercenary soldiers. Then they become thieves, burglars, cut purses, footpads, robbers of temples. And then he talks about man-stealers. What do you think man-stealers means? Kidnappers. Why do people kidnap other people? Just for the sheer fun of it? Yeah, that was a big thing. They sell them back. In our days, we also have the sex trade. The entire sex, or human trafficking sex trade, would all be based on this sort of thing. If you're doing human trafficking, you're buying and selling people. That's part of what he's talking about is man-stealers. And then he also talks that if they're able to speak well, they turn informers. Informers were people in ancient Greece who would sort of like spy on other people and give information to the authorities to try to get them into trouble. So if you think of them as sort of like private investigators for evil. Not all private investigators are bad, but these guys were. Bear false witness, perjuring themselves in law courts and taking bribes. Those are the sorts of things that will get you money. But notice, all of them are unjust, right? Does this person know that they're committing injustice? What do you think? Plato's not really clear about that. Think about people that you know that are sort of moving along that trajectory. Do they know what they're doing is wrong? Yeah.
I think at first they might, but then they start to develop just denial, and it turns into like that's fact for them. It's no longer.
Yeah, eventually you're the jerk for pointing it out to them, right? You're the unjust person who won't leave them alone when they're just trying to make a buck or, protect themselves or, yeah.
I think a lot of times they're very focused on themselves, so they don't realize how their actions are impacting the people around them. So like the injustice would be against the people around them, but they can't even realize it.
There's also injustice inside of them too that they don't want to see. A lot of times people like this don't know themselves very well. Plato talks about them driving out the old good opinions that they might have gotten from their parents or from other cultural sources. They don't want to hear, they wouldn't want to read Plato Republic Book 9, right? Somebody like this would say, why are you bothering me with this sort of thing? Are you trying to lay a guilt trip on me? That sort of thing. He also talks about them driving out good appetites. And it's not entirely clear what he means by that. But that's the tyrannical person. Now the question is, are they happy? In some respects, it looks like they could be because they're getting to do whatever they want. But is that really making them happy? Is it a happy life? And Plato raises the stakes. He says, what about if somebody like this gets to be in charge? Now what do they do? Have any of you had terrible bosses at jobs that you worked? I remember calling one of my bosses a tin pot tyrant. One time, I used to be kind of loose with what I would say. Didn't think very much about it. It was much more driven by spirit than intellect. If you've ever had a bad boss who's just like, you're always wrong, they're always right. They're always coming down on you. They're trying to get everything they can out of you. Maybe they're a tyrannical person. The tyrant. You could have a tyrannical relationship. You could have a boyfriend or girlfriend or spouse who's really a tyrant, and that would be a miserable existence as well. Or your group of friends could be unfortunately dominated by a tyrant, in which case they're not really friends so much. You guys have seen that movie Mean Girls? The one, I forget all the names of them, the one who's on top at the start.
Regina George.
What's her name?
Regina George.
Regina George, okay. She's the tyrant. She's always undermining the other ones. She's trying to keep them all in place. She's mean to everybody else around, right? She's a tyrant. And then the big story is, of course, is Lindsay Lohan's character comes in and is going to she's going to unseat her, but she becomes a tyrant in the process as well. And then she, her friend points it out to her and she doesn't want to hear it, but then it's really true, and she's supposed to learn something in the process. Well, that's sort of like the tyrant coming back to a good state. But most of the time that doesn't happen, right? Tyrannical people are sort of stuck where they are. And once they have power, that might makes right theory that we looked at, that's what they're going to use. They're in charge. Whatever they say goes. If you don't like it, they're going to use something against you. They get to have whatever it is that their appetites tell them to pursue, don't they? Because they're the boss. And Plato asks the question again, are they happy? Why not? Why is it not a happy existence? They're getting everything they want. If they want a massage, at 3 o'clock in the morning from the White House Chief of Staff, White House Chief of Staff has to do what they want, If they decide they want a big thing of M&Ms with all the green ones taken out, that's what they get. Some musicians have had that as like riders in their contracts, believe it or not. So why aren't they happy? Yeah.
Because if they have that kind of personality where they're always like wanting something from somebody else, they're never really satisfied.
Yeah, their appetites have grown so strong that even though they're able to be satisfied for a moment, they're not able to be satisfied for long. Yeah.
Maybe the methods through which they're getting their happiness, force, fraud, and fear. They're not really a genuine action from anybody that they're seeing like a true response from anybody.
Yeah, Plato says at one point the tyrant has to treat everybody as either masters or slaves. They're not able to have friends. Even if they have family members, their family members, it's always a subordinate or superior relationship. It's not a relationship of equals who actually want to be with each other. Is there any other reason? Can they actually do what they want completely? Can somebody who lives like this and uses, fraud, force, and fear on other people, can they just go out if they want to go to a concert? Can they go to the concert? Can they go to the ball game? Can they go to the party? I mean, in a way they can. How do people like that go? Can they just go by themselves, hang out? Why not? You're shaking your head.
Because they have to take the people that they're busy forcing to do things for them with them.
Their clients, or did you ever hear that? Or?
No, I was just gonna say they're always gonna have something to say about it, always complaining about something.
There's
They
that.
want something out of it.
Maybe they actually want to be in charge. Like Nero would stage these musical things, and then he'd have to play his piece, and then of course everyone had, oh, so wonderful. They have to worry about what other people are going to do. If they were to go out on the town without a bodyguard, and they've been abusing everybody, somebody's going to pop them in the face, or do much worse. Somebody will stab them, or shoot them, or something like that, or even just insult them, throw ball of mud at them, and they can't take that. So they really can't live the kind of life that they want. The other thing that's particularly bad about this is not only is the tyrant unhappy, who probably deserves to be unhappy. How's everybody else doing in this sort of city? The suck-ups do okay, so long as they stay on the right side of the tyrant. But everybody else, especially those who actually have good character, and who might say, hey, I don't want to be part of this thing that you're doing, they might get killed. They might lose all of their property. This happened quite often in ancient Greece and Rome. So the tyrant, either as a state or as a person, turns out not to be happy at all. And you might say, well, why do people live this sort of life then? Why do they aim for this sort of thing? Well, it has to do with these parts of the soul and which parts have been indulged and which parts have been neglected. And the tyrant is really, when it comes to the spirited part, a coward. They rely on other people ultimately to do all of their stuff. They're a fool. Folly is the opposite of prudence when it comes to the rational part of the soul. They're intemperate. They are unable to control their appetites for pleasures. And because all these things are out of whack, and the appetitive part is running the show, they're unjust. And so their injustice will flow from, the injustice outside will flow from the injustice inside. And they'll probably make a lot of other people unjust in the process. So that's the whole thing about the tyrannical person. It's good when we're doing virtue ethics, not just to look at how we ought to be, but how we ought not to be. And why, what's so bad about being that kind of person. Plato thinks that we often get mistaken about desires and pleasures. I actually should have left this stuff up. Rational, spirited, and appetitive. But the next thing that he talks about is each one of these having desires and having distinctive pleasures and being tied in with a sort of way of life. What is it that the rational part of the soul really wants? Just to, like, tell everybody what to do all the time? Not really. Yeah.
Wisdom.
Yeah. He talks about it as the distinctive good being truth, but then he also talks about wisdom, learning. For every one of you, there is something that you enjoy learning about. It may not be philosophy. That's okay. I don't expect everybody to share the same things. Even among philosophers, we're not always interested in the same thing. A lot of people don't like reading Plato, But there are some things that you do want to learn about, even if it's just like the box scores, or the latest fashion, or things like that. You're learning something about something, right? And every one of you has to figure out how you're going to run your life, so you have to use the rational part to some extent, at least. Figure out how to arrange your life so as to achieve the goods that you want. But these are the distinctive goods. College is actually supposed to be about this stuff. Getting rich is a nice side product of college. Getting a great job is a nice side product. But the reason why we actually have colleges and universities is because people like to learn. And otherwise you wouldn't have any professors. We don't get into this for the money. Maybe somebody does, but they're totally stupid if they think they're going to make it rich as a professor. Because there's so many other ways to make a million. What does this part want? The spirited, agitated part of our soul. He says this is the part with which we get angry.
Honor?
Yeah, it wants honor. And again, this is one of those terms that we have to translate. We don't talk about honor that much. Yeah?
Just like general qualities of your personality.
Are these general qualities, are you asking? Or?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, what type of person you are.
Well, it's a good question. These are going to make the person the kind of person that they are. But each one of them could be done well or done poorly. Hold on to that thought. We'll move into that in a moment. So let's think about honor for a minute. We don't talk about honor that much. When somebody is held up above other people, well, how do we talk about that? Yeah.
Like respect.
Respect is a word we use a lot. Prestige, you guys use that term? I think a lot of people who want celebrity want this sort of thing. He also talks about this part of the soul wanting victory, which really means wanting success. And it's also a part that likes to be in charge, likes to be over other people, likes to, be the boss. But it wants to be the boss because it's the best, What about the appetitive part? Now, Plato, here he makes a move that you might not agree with. I actually think it's a little questionable myself, but he's making it for simplicity's sake. We've talked about what the appetites want. They want things like eating whenever you want to, right? What kinds of foods do we really like? Do we really like healthy foods? Sometimes, some healthy foods, but What are the three ingredients or three tastes that tend to make food so delectable? Salt, right? Sugar, sweet, and oh, we like spicy, yeah. And spicy is usually good for you. What about fat? You take the fat content out, things don't taste the same. Replace it with that fat substitute stuff, and you have all sorts of weird side effects. The appetites would like to just eat as much as they possibly could. Just stuff yourself completely full. Same thing with like drinking, you know. And you could not necessarily drinking alcohol. Think about drinking soda. Soda tastes pretty good, right? Because it's sweet. It's got taste. There's some soda that you like. How much of it should you drink a day? Not too much, right? Should you drink a 12-pack of Coke a day? That would be really bad for you because, you know, just put a penny in Coke sometime and watch how the tarnish goes off very quickly because of the acid in it. Sex. Can our desires for sex sometimes, you know, go overboard and get us into trouble and get us into all sorts of situations that are probably not good for us? Yeah, and we make movies about this, comedies and tragedies, right? And dramas. You know, there's a whole bunch of things. Now, Plato says what we're going to talk about here is not those things. It's going to be wealth. Why wealth? Why is the appetite? Yeah.
Because you can just get all those things with money.
Exactly. So wealth leads to pleasures. And you know, some people actually do end up sort of losing sight of the connection between these, that wealth is a means to money and they desire wealth for its own sake, don't they? So there are some people who desire so that. So Plato's going to treat these things in these terms. Now there's pleasures that come with this. There is a pleasure in learning. Is all learning pleasant to you? Not even all pleasant to me, and I'm a college professor. There's some things I read and I'm like, oh my God, is this boring? And actually, there's I hate to say this, but there's some people whose texts I'm going to be inflicting on you later this semester, who you are not going to be reading them for their literary value or style. You're going to be reading them for the ideas that are in them. But, you know, Bentham and Kant, they are not great stylists. They are kind of a chore to read. There's pleasure in the ideas, in learning the ideas, but there's not pleasure in the way that they're arranged. But there's other things that, you know, we all enjoy learning to some degree. Do we enjoy being honored by other people? Is that pleasurable? Yeah, we human beings like that. We like to have other people look up to us, particularly if we're deserving of it. Then it really feels good. If we're not deserving of it, then we're always like, I'm not sure if I should take this award or not. You know, maybe I don't completely deserve it. But you know, so long as we think that we're deserving of it, we really enjoy this. What about wealth? Do you like when you open the birthday card and there's a $20 bill in it? Does that feel good? Now you don't actually sit there and think to yourself, aha, I have wealth. Now I can purchase for myself pleasures. You know, you probably don't even think automatically that now I can buy this one thing that I wanted that'll give me pleasure. You're happy you got the $20 bill. What if somebody gave you a €20 note instead of a $20 bill? How would you react to that? It's worth a little bit more, by the way, than a $20 bill. Because the euro is stronger than the dollar right now. You wouldn't care, right? You'd be like, what the hell's with this fake money? Because you can't buy anything with it over here. But we do desire wealth. There's a pleasure involved in contemplating it. When you guys have retirement accounts later on, you'll find yourself every once in a while checking on and be like, yeah, cool, I got some money in there. That's great, you know. And the pleasures that we, want to buy with wealth, well, we know that those are pleasant, right? So we have pleasures all up and down this range. Here's the question you can ask. Which of them is actually the most pleasant? Now, each of these, if you pursue them, leads to a different kind of life. There's the life of the philosopher, or I think we would probably say the life of the intellectual, the person who is pursuing intellectual goods. There's the person who is pursuing goods of respect, honor, the honor seeker, the ambitious person, He talks about the soldier, but could we imagine a lot of other people involved in that sort of thing? I think so. You know, people who want to be managers. Maybe they don't want to make a ton of money, they actually want to be in charge of an organization. If you are thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, I think that's probably this part of your soul that's real excited about that. The appetitive part of the soul, what is it like when that is the primary thing? Then you're a wealth seeker. And you're a wealth seeker because you want to be able to buy nice things and enjoy them. So, whose life is actually the most pleasant is the question. Plato deals with this by looking at two different things at first. One is what he calls the criterion, and then experience. So let's look at experience first. By show of hands, how many of you have enjoyed learning? Now, it's not surprising that almost all of you are raising your hands because it's a college classroom, right? If you didn't enjoy learning at all, where would you more likely be right now?
Working.
Not in school, out in the workforce. Maybe you've gone to a vocational school instead, done an apprenticeship. You know, apprentices actually have to learn a lot too, though. It's just, craft knowledge. Have you, all of you, held office at one time, or at least excelled in something, be your classmates, your teammates, been integral to your team, winning victory over somebody else? You've enjoyed that sort of pleasure. You have experience with that. You've all, enjoyed eating and drinking, right? That sort of bodily pleasure stuff, like taking naps, playing video games, watching TV, that sort of stuff. That's enjoyable. So, who actually has the most experience? Plato says, well, this guy, the person who's devoted to this kind of life, they know what bodily pleasures are like because we all pursue bodily pleasures. You could, of course, have somebody who's like the prototypical nerd, as opposed, there's oftentimes intellectual people make a distinction between a nerd and a geek. Have you guys ever heard this distinction? Nerds are lacking social skills and they're intensely interested in something and vaguely intellectual. Geeks are intensely interested in that but actually have social skills. They know how to get along with other people. So it's an insult to be called a nerd, but it's a good thing to be a geek. Are you familiar with this? Now you know. But you could have somebody who's very nerdy and doesn't know what physical pleasures are like or doesn't appreciate them, couldn't you? Plato's not talking about that kind of guy. Plato's talking about somebody who actually has experienced physical pleasures. Now, people who are good at what they do intellectually, do they get to experience things like this? Honor, respect. What's a good question for our society? If you make $1 million out of it, then we tend to honor you. But if you're just, some guy who's written a book about something, maybe not. But Plato in his time, at least, you could say, yeah, generally, they're looked up to for what they've achieved. I'll tell you, with philosophy, with my family, because I come from a blue-collar background, I had a hell of a time explaining to them why what I did was not just a complete waste of time. They'd ask things like, what is it you produce exactly? You're going to write a book? Okay, so you teach students, but what are you teaching them? What's this philosophy business? Things like, well, I teach them how to read texts. Well, hell, can't they just read texts on their own? I mean, just go buy a book. There's lack of understanding, so lack of appreciation. We could actually call appreciation this sort of thing. Just assume for a moment that the philosopher, the intellectual, actually does get this. So they have experience of all three pleasures. The question is, do these guys have experience of all three pleasures? If all your life is about making money and then enjoying yourself, are you going to likely spend a lot of time learning? You'll learn so you can get the MBA, so you can get the job. But in your spare time, are you going to spend your time learning? Probably not. What if you're very ambitious? you'll learn the things that you need in order to get ahead, in order to, like, say, gain office or be in charge. But you're probably not going to spend a lot of time learning for its own sake, so you're not going to experience that pleasure. So the people who run their lives according to these parts of the soul are not going to be as good of a judge about the type of pleasure that we're talking about, the quality of the pleasure. What about what he's calling the criterion? When you talk about a criterion, what does that mean? Criterion for something. We usually say criteria, right? Yeah.
Requirements.
Yeah, I think we do use the word in that way. Yeah.
Like a rubric, like a general guideline almost?
Yeah. Okay, that's a good way to put it too. Criteria show up in rubrics, right? Because rubrics are like this big, complicated document that we put together. We give, like, I give you criteria for what I want to see in your papers. Those are like requirements. And this is what counts as a great paper. This is what counts as a so-so paper. A criterion is a means of judging. It's what you use to make a judgment. So what is the criterion that's used by the intellectual? It's reason itself. That's really the best criterion. You're not going to get much better than that, the faculty of reason. This guy is going to use the criterion of, does it lead to honor, respect, appreciation, being in charge, success, victory? That can be a good criterion in a lot of respects, can't it? If you're being pragmatic about things and say, what's actually going to work? We need to win games. What's actually going to help us win games? There's your criterion, right? We need to get this report done before our competitors come out with a new product so that we can beat them out in the market. That's a criterion, right? Is that going to work for everything that's valuable in your life? Can you treat, say, your relationship with your significant other that way? You know, what's going to bring you honor, respect, prestige, pride? Should I date her or shouldn't I? I don't know. Is she going to bring me prestige? How does that sound to you? Maybe it doesn't work so well for that. Should I actually study Plato for the sake of studying Plato? I don't know. Is it going to lead to success over my opponents? Probably not. Well, I'm not going to read Plato then. You're going to miss out on some stuff then by doing it. So that's not going to be that reliable of a criterion. In some ways, it's still a better criterion than at this level. Because what does this person rely on? Is it going to make me money? If it's not going to make me money, it's not worth anything. Now imagine putting relationships in that sort of framework. You know, think about teaching, for example. This is not particularly remunerative. Maybe I should just, like have you guys, watch a bunch of movies and make things totally easy for myself and just kind of phone it in. Would that be the right thing to do? It'd be wrong in many respects, wouldn't it? And you should get angry, at the very notion of that, I think. But if all that counts for me is making a lot of money, that would make sense as my criteria. There's going to be a lot more left out in pursuit of wealth, and the valuation of wealth is the primary good, or even the pleasures that it brings, than there will be using the faculty of reason. The person who has reason can appreciate how good wealth is, but it's a limited good, right? It's not the good. It's good for some things, bringing pleasure. And pleasure's a good, but it's not the good. So, who's the best qualified person? Well, what's the answer we're supposed to arrive at? Well, the person who devotes themselves to cultivating this part of their soul, which means that these parts are going to have to be in line. Because if you're too ambitious, this part of your soul is going to make reason do what it wants. If you can't control your appetites, you're not going to have time to develop reason very much. You're just going to use reason to satisfy your appetites. And you're at risk for becoming a tyrannical person if you don't develop some limits. So that is how Plato resolves this. I don't know, how do you guys find this plausible, or is there some holes in this? I pointed out a few. But this is his model. This is his idea. One of the things that's worth carrying forth from this is this notion that even the rational part has its desires and its distinctive pleasures. It's not supposed to be, a really boring life that he's advocating. He has one other thing that he says that's kind of interesting about these pleasures as well. And here he gets very metaphysical. He starts talking about the nature of pain and pleasure. And you probably haven't thought that much about this, but next week we're actually going to talk much more about this. These are opposites, right? Pain and pleasure? They're not the same thing, clearly. Now, is it sort of like an on-off switch? Like that light switch over there where you're either feeling pain or you're feeling pleasure and, one or the other? Or is there something that he calls like a middle, a neutral state in between? Let's move this out a little bit more so it's a bit more symmetrical. A state of rest, neither pain nor pleasure. Doesn't this seem more plausible to you? Mm-hmm. Now, think about certain pains that you have experienced in your lifetime that Plato talks about in this text. Being sick. All of you have probably been pretty sick in the last year at one time or another. And if you haven't been sick because of illness, maybe you've been hungover. That's better than being sick with illness because it goes away pretty quick, right? But when you're sick, just being not sick feels so good, and you desire it so much because the pain really sucks, right? When you have a terrible headache, the headache goes away, and you're like, man, it's a great day now. So you don't always have to go all the way over to here to feel pleasure. Pleasure can come about from a removal or a lessening or a privation of pain. Hunger is like that. When you're really hungry, it hurts, right? You felt hunger pangs in your stomach, and you go and you get something to eat. You don't even care what it is. I mean, you'd eat crappiest food whatsoever if you're really hungry. And you'll think, wow, this is excellent. And then about 5 minutes later when you're full, you'll be like, I can't believe I ate that garbage. But why does it feel so good? They say hunger is the best sauce. Because you move from a condition of pain to a condition of no longer having the pain, and it feels pleasurable in the process. So there is a kind of pleasure that comes from it. What about, can it work the other way around? Take away a pleasure that you're feeling particularly intensely, and now you feel pain as a result. Think about when you're really into, here's a great example. Somebody's playing a game, right? They're just about to beat that level, and then suddenly the power goes out. What's their reaction? They throw the controller, start swearing, stupid electric company. Now, a more rational approach would be try to figure out did the fuse blow, that sort of thing. We have this reaction at first. Why? Because we feel a kind of pain as a result of pleasure being taken away. You ever try to stop a dog eating when it's eating its meal? Probably only try it once. Because the dog will probably try to bite you. Because they're really enjoying that. People do that too, What else? Do we have other phantom pains like that? We have that with sexual things. Stop somebody right in the middle of everything, and pleasure turns to pain. Drinking, somebody cuts you off at the bar. Now you're irritated. So it's not a fun night anymore. I guess that could count as that sort of thing. Now here's where it gets interesting. Plato talks about, he says you have to imagine a world in which there's a higher and a middle and a lower level. And let's say that you've only lived in this lower level your entire life. You don't actually know that there's a higher level. You go from the lower to the middle level. What are you going to think the middle level is? Yeah.
The highest degree.
Exactly. So you're going to think that this is actually the higher. And are you right about that? You're wrong about that, right? But it's because you don't actually know better. You haven't experienced the higher level. I think we could apply this to a lot of different sort of things. When people are, like learning about something that they just it didn't occur to them before. People have all these sort of interesting realizations. Now, can that apply to this? Well, these things in between are sort of like somebody going from the lower level up to the middle level. Or you could go the other way around, right? You could go from the higher level down to the middle level, and then what will the middle level look like? It will look like the lower level, right? It's an illusion. So there's all sorts of things that we think are pleasures and think are pains that aren't really, when they come down to it, pleasures and pains in any genuine sense. They're only in appearance. This is why I said it's kind of metaphysical, right? Reality and appearance. Now, most bodily pleasures, when you boil down to it, are oftentimes a result of going from a state of, lacking something or something bothering us to that being taken away or getting what it is that you want, right? Think about the pleasure that the addict feels as opposed to the pleasure that the first-time user feels when it comes to various drugs or even, smoking or drinking. I remember when I first started smoking, because I smoked for years, after you get past like the coughing and that sort of thing, that feeling of your lungs like contracting in on you, it's kind of a rush. After a while, you don't get that anymore. But you need the cigarette, and you can't start your day without it. And if you don't have it, you're going to feel pain. And then when you do get it, it's not like you're actually feeling pleasure as such. You're just not feeling pain, and you're like, yeah, this is really good. That's the way coffee is for me now. I drink about 2 pots a day, which is not good. I don't advise that. And if I don't drink coffee, I'll get these terrible headaches. I'll have pain. The drinking the coffee, it's pleasurable, but it's not super pleasurable. It's not way over here. It's more satisfying a need that I have. Now, Plato thinks that most of our bodily pleasures are that kind. What about other kinds of pleasures? He doesn't talk about like the pleasures of winning or success, but I think you could say that those are very often that sort of thing as well. What about learning? When you don't know something beforehand, you feel pain in your head where that empty spot where the learning ought to be? No. And then when you actually do learn something, it's just kind of this innocent pleasure, right? It's generally not going to get you in trouble unless you're learning something you're not supposed to and then applying it. So the kind of pleasure that's available through higher things is a more real, more genuine pleasure, and that's only available to the person who cultivates their faculty of reason. It's not available to the person who just cultivates their appetites or their spirited part of their soul. In order to truly be happy, in order to truly experience pleasure, Plato is saying, you have to cultivate your rational part of your soul. So in order to be truly happy, you would actually have to be just. That's where this leads to. What that implies is that we're not actually, unless we're completely just, I know I'm not, we're not actually as happy as we could be. So that's a good point to sort of end on and think about.